Thanks very much. So really glad to jump in with you today and look at what we have on tap. As always, we use Zoretta Hammond's framework of starting with what we know and then moving on towards new information so that we're kind of building on things that we've already learned about and then delving into the unknown, sort of going from the known to the unknown, and then saving lots of time for questions and answers today as well. You know our mantra, and we have so much that we have to do right now to get ready for more students returning for in-person learning. And so, you know, these words they've mattered all along. They've mattered in different ways with each kind of step in our response to this pandemic. And, you know, I just so appreciate your willingness to be confident, to use information, to make decisions, to ask questions of each other, to ask questions of us, so that we are all better together. None of us are as smart as all of us is truly one of my sayings that I so fervently believe in. So a few things just to start by welcoming and igniting and going to our recall of things that we've talked about previously or that the department has talked about previously. And I think the further school reopening, right? I didn't call this school reopening because school's been open since the beginning of the school year and in different ways since the beginning of the school year. But now as we come to April, we're gonna have a further school reopening in our state. So just wanna quickly recap some of what the commissioner has talked about in regards to our school reopening. Keep in mind that this has really been guided by our medical experts, over 300 doctors who support our move towards in-person learning, including that 3 feet of distance between students when masked. And so important that we have all the mitigation strategies in place. We know how strong they are when they're used together. And we're also pleased, of course, that the CDC has now embraced this idea of 3 feet of distance when masked. And so I'm not going to read you the points here that are on this slide, but I think they really kind of recap why this is the time to be doing this, though I know it is taking a lot of effort. So I'm not minimizing the work that it's taking, but it's the time to take that effort. So again, I know you know these timelines, but returning all of our elementary students by April 5th, middle school grades by April 28th, and the commissioner has made a commitment to announcing high school in April, likely early April, so that we can give as much notice as possible about the expectation for the return for high school students. We've put out guidance on this that March 8th or 9th, it's on our website. And really with all of our guidance, I would ask that, you know, you're thinking to yourself about how am I as a school or district leader reading this guidance, internalizing it, and then also sharing it with our teachers to make sure that there is that flow through. That's really our theory of action, is that we're sharing this information with you in PowerPoints like this, in presentations like this, in our guidance, and really with the expectation that then you're passing that on to your teams as well. So going from there to thinking about some special education implications. Oh, sorry, one more piece just about parents do have the ability to continue to choose remote learning through the end of the year, which is actually a good segue for down the road when we talk about summer. So I'll get to that in a minute. But let me slow down right now and really focus on special education. What are the special education implications of this further reopening? We've had a lot of questions that have come into us about the use of the COVID-19 Special Education Learning Plan. Remember last spring, we called it the Remote Learning Plan. This summer and fall, we changed the name to the COVID-19 Special Education Learning Plan because it was meant to address how special education services might be provided differently, still provided, FAPE still very much provided, but provided differently in a hybrid or remote environment, or perhaps if in-person is dramatically changed. And so we've been asked, you know, what happens with those now that kids continue to come back to school? So what's really important to know about this is that we haven't changed our guidance. If a special education learning plan is still needed, we still want you to use it. We're not asking you to change that for the remainder of this school year. So if services are being provided differently, please, differently than how they're written in the IEP, continue to use the learning plan. You can adapt the learning plan if you need to. It can be a work in progress. It's a living document. However, if the return to in-person learning means that the IEP will be delivered exactly as written, it will not be delivered differently, then there's no need for the learning plan. You don't have to get rid of it. It's not needed anymore. You're just following the IEP, which is great news. So Again, we're not changing our guidance about the learning plans. If what you have done covers you through the spring, covers the student through the spring, you're in good shape. If implementing the full IEP is what you're doing, you're in good shape. But is there a scenario where maybe you need to go back to the learning plan now and make some adjustments? Yes, absolutely. And remember, the critical part to the learning plan is the engagement of the family around it. So if you think that there needs to be a change to the learning plan, make sure you're discussing that with the family, making sure that you are coming to a conclusion, and then sending a revised document that documents that conversation. Remember, we didn't call it a notification because that seems kind of one way, whereas you're documenting the conversation that you have with the family if necessary. And so that really brings us to thinking about, this is a time of year when so many IEP meetings are happening, and special education is always looking to the future. You're always planning that 1 year out. And so you're planning IEPs right now, you're coming to these annual reviews, and you're writing about services for next school year. So right now, April is putting into the chat our updated FAQ. So what I'm going to talk to you about on the second part of this slide is written about in greater detail in the FAQ that April's putting in the chat. But what we want you to be thinking about is that for next school year, continue to write the IEP just as you are now. There's not a change here, but continue to write the IEP with the expectation of in-person services. So with the expectation that you're going to draft it that students will be in person at the beginning of next school year throughout, for this IEP period. And there could be this idea though that you need to have some contingencies. So let's just imagine that there's a student who is immunocompromised, and the family is already pretty concerned that at the start of next school year, just not quite sure, for them, for their child in particular, more vulnerable child to the virus, what will we be ready? Will that student be ready to re-enter the school next year? And so there might be some individual cases where contingencies need to be made for next school year. And what I want to get across to you right now, what's really important is that we want those contingencies written into the IEP, not in a learning plan for next year. So again, the learning plans, the special education learning plans, they are intact, they are in place for this school year. But when you're meeting this spring and you're planning for next school year, and you need to make any type of contingencies, and I gave you one reason for contingencies, there might be others, but any type of contingency that needs to be added for a student really needs to go into the IEP. And we think that the best place to do that is documented in the IEP, particularly under additional information. That would be the place that I think it would make the most sense to do that. So when we say documented in the IEP, maybe write down a note for yourself that, what I'm thinking about is that would be in the additional information section. You're going to write the service delivery grid, right? Just like the student is coming in person. But then if there need to be some contingency plans about those services, you would describe that in additional information, or that could be described in the N1. So again, learning plans for the rest of this year. As you're planning for next year, if you have to do any type of contingency planning, put it in the IEP, either in additional information or on the N1. And I'll be glad to go back over this because we had so many questions that came into us. If there are questions in the chat, I do not mind repeating this because I know it's something we really have to get our minds around, our heads around for the rest of this school year and how we plan for next year. And I hope that's clear. Like, I hope it feels like, okay, they're not changing anything on us. The learning plans have been in place this year. DESE's not changing that. It's just as we look ahead to next year, we're going to be moving away, hopefully, from the learning plans and getting things as much into the IEP as possible at this time. That's our recommendation to you, and I hope you find that helpful. So again, I'll be glad to go back over this because I really want to make sure that this is well understood and well supported as we go forward. The other thing that's on our minds about students coming back in is that we have students in the state who maybe haven't been in school consistently, maybe not 100%, maybe students have been predominantly remote for this year, and we are worried about, and I think we all are, about what are the needs of the students going to be. Are students going to need support with self-regulation? Are we going to need to make sure that our teachers are really well equipped with what are the de-escalation strategies that will be very effective for our students? And so what we've done, and really appreciate the members of my team who've just showed such great initiative around this and gone out and sought out your colleagues from public schools, charter schools, approved special education schools, and collaboratives to put together a panel of local experts, frankly, from within Massachusetts, to talk about what are those strategies, what are some of those effective strategies that we think are especially effective. Maybe some things for all of us to learn about the kind of lived experience of schools and districts that have been working with students this school year and have realized what is deeply necessary for supporting their needs around the social emotional supports in school to really help them stay self-regulated. And so, we just know that this is the time to do it. We think about, this date of April 27th. Hopefully your teams will have had some experience and some, they'll be seeing their students at the elementary level starting in earlier April. So by April 27th, maybe some further questions about supporting their students. And then we think about, this summer and next fall, all of this, we hope the timing for this will be very beneficial as we, begin to bring students back and then look ahead to the summer and fall. This will of course be recorded so that you can make sure that if you can't attend live on April 27th at 1 o'clock, that you're able to, perhaps use it later with your teams to share the good information that I know we will be getting from our experts right from within our schools and districts here in Massachusetts. So here's our intended audience. Here's who we think would be well served to join this meeting. We'll have capacity for 1,000 people, and we look forward to just really thinking about who are those people in your districts, how can we support them, particularly those people who are implementing, overseeing, and doing a lot of the training work around for other teachers and direct care staff about those strategies to support all students, not just students with disabilities, but all students with self-regulation. So again, just a small thing that we're doing, but we hope very effective and very timely and relevant as well. So with that in mind, I'm going to turn now to dyslexia, a topic that I just want to give you an update on in terms of where are we and what's coming. So just a quick background that, I've gone over this before, but the guidance that will be coming out very, very soon is co-developed by both us and EEC, and it responds to the 2018 law. In addition, the key areas that it covers are listed here, and I won't read them all to you, but really the statute required us to be thinking about to be providing guidance around screening. We've really gone above and beyond that to talk about interventions. And so really tying the two together through a tiered system, an MTSS or tiered systems of support model. And so we shared our very early draft in our January meeting, I do believe it was, with you, and I'll just say more about what's happened with it since. So we released our draft chapters in January. We've gone out for stakeholder feedback. We've been doing revisions, and our final production will come out next month. What our plan is that it will we're in final production and then release in April. And our plan is actually that the next special education leaders meeting that we'll have in April will focus on the dyslexia guidance. A few things to add about that based on questions that we've had and just what we know we need to do. Beyond our release in early April, we're looking ahead to knowing that we need to produce information for families. That was some of the feedback that we got when we went out for the stakeholder feedback sessions, was to, the document is not written for families. And so how do we translate it into family-friendly information? And also the thing that we've heard really, really loud and clear, especially from special education directors, is that this guidance, especially around screening and early intervention, is not the sole responsibility of special education. And in fact, it really needs to be owned by general education. So as we release this, yes, I am going to talk to special education directors about it, no doubt, but we are also going to be working with literacy directors. We are also going to be working with principals. So we think about what it will be. We're working right now on our role-based rollout. How do we bring the right type of training on this guidance to the people who will ultimately be responsible for it? And to that end, really, again, based on the feedback that you gave us in January, when we went out for stakeholder feedback, we went to principals, we went to elementary principals, we went to literacy specialists. We didn't just keep this within the special education family, because we know that that early screening is really happening at the classroom level. And it's something that we need the general education teachers to take on. We need the principal's support for it. We need literacy directors to maybe shift some of those assessment practices, those screening practices. So we've been very deliberate about taking this to, we think, a very wide audience, both for stakeholder input and for the ultimate production. I mentioned to you in January that, yes, we went out for stakeholder engagement, but the science behind the guidance was not going to change. So what we know about dyslexia, that was not something that we were saying, hey, what do you think? Because that's evidentiary. And so the science behind screening, the science behind intervention, there were some really important points that we learned from the stakeholder engagement that are definitely built into the revised document that you will see in April. But the kind of underlying science wasn't something that we were going to change. And to that end, I said back in January, you can start using this. Even if it's a draft, you can certainly start looking at it. You can start getting used to it. And I encourage you to continue to do so. We can certainly make the draft available even now on demand, although I just say we're so close to the launch. My advice would be, with everything else going on, just give us a couple weeks and we'll be back with the final document for you very, very soon. But you can start using that draft that we released in January for planning purposes, to start thinking about the screening tools that you're using, so that you can be ready for next school year, because a lot of the planning obviously has to happen and purchasing needs to happen as early in this calendar year as possible. So that's why we wanted to get that early draft to you in January. The other thing that I'll just mention is that as part of our next steps, we are also making sure that there's a really tight connection between what's included in this dyslexia guidance and what will be in our our ICERS document, is Special Education, the Right Services. And just as a preview, I think we are moving away from the idea of ICERS being just one kind of written document, instead kind of breaking it apart so that we are really focusing on its component pieces: referral, eligibility, evaluation, and so that it will be something that districts can go to get the information they need in a more kind of nimble way than this really lengthy document that tries to cover all of those pieces. So pretty soon, we're not going to call it ICERS anymore. I'm excited about that, to move to kind of more of getting directly to the heart of what those component pieces are about: referral, eligibility, evaluation. And we're making sure there's a really tight connection between our dyslexia guidance and those three critical components of the IEP process. So we are making sure there's a good tie-in. We look forward to releasing this to you in early April. I'm glad to answer questions you might have about it now, but really, I have a feeling that we're going to get into it a lot more the next time that we meet. And if it's just happens to not be ready, it'll just be the meeting after that. But we're really that close to finally having this ready for you, and I'm excited about the quality of it. I think you'll find that it's really I think what's needed to support our students well. So let's go to compensatory services. We just have an update here that I had mentioned that we were thinking about the last time that we met, that we have now acted upon. So just a quick reminder that our advisory and our family fact sheet are still available, right? Nothing's changed there. This is old news for you, hopefully, in terms of the existence of our advisory as well as the family fact sheet. But here's the part that I want you to lean in on. We had talked the last time about, for this school year, right, for the consideration of compensatory services for this school year, for school year 21, we were getting a lot of questions about, what do we do with this year? So in our FAQ, remember the last time we met, we said that schools and districts absolutely can, and in some cases very much should, be talking with families and deciding what compensatory services are needed for this year, if students haven't gotten some of the services on their IEPs, or if they have, showed very deep regression. And what I mentioned the last time is we were thinking about, unique populations of students for whom there might be more of a need for a discussion of compensatory services for this year. So that question that we shared with you the last time, the question and answer in our FAQ about considerations for this year, we built it out a little bit further. And so we said, this language is taken directly from the FAQ, that students who are in these groups might need that individual consideration for compensatory services. So those students include those who have been in a fully remote model for much of this school year, so 3 or more months of this school year. If they were in a remote model, we think that that consideration is that much more needed. Students who've been chronically absent, and students who have had significant difficulty accessing remote learning. So these are kind of the 3 groups that we really want you thinking about, focused on, just to make sure that if there is a need for compensatory services for those students, that you are having those conversations. As we mentioned previously, you can have those during the IEP meetings that are happening for the rest of this year. You can have them, it can be a unique meeting if necessary. Remember, compensatory services discussions don't have to happen during team meetings. They can be, a more informal way of holding those meetings. So that can be done as well. But we really wanted to highlight these 3 groups that we feel are just, more vulnerable, more needed, where compensatory services really might need to be considered for them for this school year in particular. So again, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have about this, particularly when we get to the Q&A session at the end of today's meeting. So some new information, some things that we have done since the last time that we met. The first one is about transportation guidance. So we had some really good outreach as soon as we released our February 2021 transportation guidance for all students. We had a lot of questions that came to us about special education transportation in particular. And so just remembering that here's a link to that transportation guidance. And just a reminder, this is a new information, but that if for any student for whom transportation is provided in their IEP, if the parents transport the student, those families can be reimbursed. And of course, we continue to ask that you consider that if that's a safer way of getting students to school. And so, in any cases where transportation is included in the IEP, and if the family can't provide transportation, we still have to figure out a way to make it happen. I know that's a challenge, and I really appreciate the way that you've stepped up to that all throughout this school year. But capacity limits was a really key thing that came up a lot in the February guidance that we just wanted to dig into deeper in thinking about smaller vehicles. Like the vans and the smaller buses that are often used in special education. And so in the same way that the capacity limits have been lifted on the larger vehicles, on the smaller vehicles as well, as long as mitigation strategies are in place, particularly that mask wearing, the hand washing, the staying home if you're sick, capacity limits for preschool and elementary students have been lifted. Similarly for middle and high school students, except if they are coming from within a community where there is a high prevalence of COVID from within the community, then we know that we're talking about 2 students per bus bench. And as we kind of translate that into what bus bench means on different types of vehicles and in different types of seating on vehicles. But that basically means a space, right, between the students. They're not sitting right next to each other. And then we also contemplate what does it mean for students who can't wear masks. And again, and I've definitely gotten some feedback on this, that this really creates a challenge, but it's one that from a health and safety perspective, there's not a way around it, that if a student can't wear a mask, then we do have to maintain 6 feet of distance between that student and others as to the greatest extent feasible. And, a face shield could be a way of further adding a mitigation strategy. And then, maybe looking at alternative transportation arrangements like I talked about at the beginning of this section as well. So again, I'll be glad to take any questions that you have about special education transportation, but just some important updates that we recently released for you to consider as well. So let's move on to summer. And on a nice warm day like today, it's easy to start thinking about summer. And there is some really important information here, though, about ESY that I want to go over with you. So this comes from the March 15th FAQ that came from the Commissioner's Office, not our special education FAQ. And really kind of reiterating in that FAQ that we want students next summer, this upcoming summer, to receive as much in-person learning as possible. But here's the important thing. For ESY, we are saying that families need to have an opt-out ability for the summer. So you would be planning for in-person services for your students. And you know, the difference is that right now families are told either or, like pick either in-person or remote. What we're talking about for the summer is kind of an evolution of saying to families, we're planning for in-person for your child, but you do have the ability to opt out and receive remote instruction if necessary. And I'll say more about that in just a minute, but I just want to set up the contrast that we have for this upcoming summer, that other summer programming does not need to have a remote option unless there are special circumstances that arise on an individual student basis. So those other summer programs like an acceleration academy, a credit recovery model, traditional summer school, for example, those models don't need to have this opt-out, but ESY does, and here's why. ESY is a required program. Those other programs aren't. And because it's required, we felt like there's sort of a different duty, different kind of responsibility to families if they are coming to a required program. And where ESY is a direct extension of this school year, we felt like where a remote option has been available for families for this school year, it needed to be available for them for this summer as well, but more on an opt-out type of model, so that there is evolution, but still continuity from this school year into this summer. And the last thing that I'll say about it, and it sort of gets into this next slide, is that you know, when we think about next fall, I'll start down here at the bottom, that, you know, one of the things that we anticipate happening is that you know, as I mentioned earlier, I gave that example of a student who is immunocompromised. Families will have a lot on their minds as they think about both this summer and next school year. And you know, frankly, there might be the need for families to go to their doctor to get doctor's input on the child's inability to come into school next fall. Frankly, I didn't want to send families to the doctor twice, once for this summer and then again for next fall. So when we said that there needs to be an opt-out model for this summer, it's really with the kind of thinking that we need to put most of our emphasis on any kind of, if there have to be remote services provided next school year, and if physicians have to be involved, which is not, you know, a conclusion yet, but if that's, you know, what we're leading towards, I felt pretty strongly that, you know, I didn't want to have to send families to their physicians twice. It's hard to get doctor's appointments. Doctors are busy right now. And so let's, you know, support our families right now by creating this opt-out model for the summer, and then plan that, you know, likely, and we've already signaled this in our, the guidance that we put out on March 9th, to say that, you know, next year things will be different in terms of a family's ability to choose remote. And so let's put our focus there on any kind of interface with the medical community for individual students and not for this summer. And I know that, you know, a lot of the feedback that I've gotten is that, Russell, you're putting a really big staffing crunch on us because it's hard to find the staff. I'm sure this is in the chat right now. You know, that, you know, it's hard to find the staff for the summer, and I understand that. I just didn't see, you know, kind of a different pathway for us. And so I realized that, you know, there is this challenge. I would encourage you to think about live streaming for those students who are remote. Are there live streaming capabilities for them so that you don't have to have, you know, kind of two staffing models? Can you, you know, combine into one through live streaming? But, you know, I hope that, you know, this is sort of the again, the continuation of this school year. And then for next fall, we look at sort of different ways of approaching some of the issues that have led students to not be able to be in school this year could be relooked at next year, particularly as the vaccine continues to roll out. So I think that's the main thing about this summer and how it fits into next school year. Just want to remind you again for ESY, starting with, presuming that students are coming in person, but giving families the ability to opt out for remote. As we think about next school year, some of you are involved in discussions about retention. So on this page, I just want to call out the bullet kind of in the middle of the slide here, talking about discouraging student retention, including students who didn't enter kindergarten this year. We know that we have a large number of preschool and kindergarten students who didn't come in to the public school system this school year. And so our advice is not to hold them back, not to have them do kindergarten as a 6-year-old, for example, but instead have them go on to first grade if it's an example, and if the example is a kindergartner. And a lot of times when I've talked to district leaders about this is to say, look at your school committee policy. You probably have a policy on this, and look to see how you will use it in relation to those students who will be presenting themselves, families presenting themselves, and what will be the expectation for what grade they will be entering. So I hope that's helpful. And again, I'll be glad to answer any questions that you have about that when we get to the Q&A at the end. And we are pretty close. So we'll go on now to the modified competency determination. So we've talked about this a little bit in the past, but I still kept it in the new section because there is some new information that I think is really important for you here. And keep in mind that, for students with disabilities, I always advise people to go back to the 2018 advisory that we shared out, that is still extremely relevant now. Thinking about how the CD fits with how the CD is part of the full set of requirement or set of conditions that lead to graduation. And so just reminding ourselves that students can graduate if they've received FAPE, which basically means, in this case for graduation, that FAPE is not being disputed at the time of graduation, that, that there's a sort of a dispute that FAPE hasn't been provided, right, is what we talk about in our advisory, so that the student has received FAPE and that they've completed all of the local graduation requirements and earned the CD. Those three things have to come together for students with disabilities to be able to graduate. Let's talk about the modified CD and how it fits in then. So last year, and we're narrowing this piece about the modified CD for the purposes of today's conversation down to just those students. For this conversation, we're talking about those students who are enrolled beyond grade 12. And here at DESE, we call those SP students. So we're going to call, that's the language we're going to use for SP students who are beyond grade 12, who might be eligible for the modified CD. Last year, we said, identify who those students are, show us that they took an applicable class, and we granted the modified CD. This year, we're changing it a little bit. We want more evidence of particularly that the parent and or student are very aware that this is happening, and that this relates to when the student was expected to graduate. Because again, these students beyond 12th grade are kind of more in that 18 to 22-year-old range, and so how we connect to adult services is so important for those students. And so for this year, we want to see the kind of evidence that planning for graduation was part of the IEP process. So if you are submitting the application to have the modified CD count for an SP student from your district, we need to see either the page 8, which is the additional information and signature page of the IEP. And so it's particularly that additional information section that we want to see, or the N1, because this is discussed, in our thinking about this, we said it's not always discussed just in one place on the IEP. So we could either, you could show us page 8, additional information, the signature, or the N1 and the parent's agreement to it. So again, that signature page. If you, to show us that this was well within the consideration for that student, that they weren't planning to stay until they're 22, that in fact, this is part of a graduation plan to get the CD, to meet the local requirements, and to graduate this June in particular, or maybe this summer, that this was already part of the planning process. There are some students, though, who maybe this option or this opportunity kind of creates a new new thinking about graduation for a young person who's an SP student. And so let me describe this using two scenarios. So going back to the page that I just showed you, let's imagine that there's a student who, again, an SP student, and this past September, let's just say September 30th, 2020, and if it's helpful, you might want to write this down, like to kind of the side-by-side comparison of the difference of actions that you need to take. So let's just imagine there's a student on, that fits in on this slide, that, you had a meeting this past September 30th, you have a meeting, and the IEP shows that that student was planning to graduate either this June or maybe next summer, sometime prior to October 1st, 2021. There was a graduation date that was put into the IEP for that student. You are in great shape. Send us the paperwork. Show us that that was the planning for the student. Show us that the student took the applicable class, and the modified CD, you're moving ahead towards it. We still reserve the right to double check that. We will be looking individually at the paperwork you send. So it's not a slam dunk, but you're on the right path towards getting the CD for that student. Let's look at a comparison. And that what this first bullet on this slide is talking about is this scenario. So let's imagine again, September 30th, 2020, you have a team meeting for an SP student. And the decision at that time is that the student will graduate in 2023, right? It's not 2021. When the team met, the best information they had at the time was that the student would graduate in 2023. And now here it is, spring of 2021, the modified CD is here, and it kind of changes things. You think, well, maybe that would be a good option for this student. For that student, what we're saying is, you need to show us that you actually met again, either through an amendment meeting or an IP meeting, but that you got back together and talked about this with the family or the student, and came to agreement. And show us that. Show us that there is new documentation that shows us the new graduation date and the parent or student's agreement, so that we can see that people were well informed and well ready for this date to come for this student, which is faster than what it was planned for originally. So again, if everything lines up, if the paperwork shows that the student was planning to graduate this spring or this summer, you don't need to do anything, just show us that paperwork. If this option kind of wakes people up to a new possibility, then you've got to show us that that possibility was explained to families, that they agreed, that the student was on board, and that everything is set. So again, like I mentioned, we're going to be reviewing the paperwork that you send in. This really should be a small number of students. I know I'm kind of talking at length about this, but it's important to get it right for this small number of students. And so we hope that that will help kind of guide you through this process. And I hope I've explained this clearly enough. I hope the FAQ will help you. This part of the FAQ isn't quite out just yet. It will be coming soon, whereas the other information that I've shared with you earlier today is already printed, already live on our website. This piece is coming, so that's why I wanted to be very deliberate with you about it. The final thing that I'll mention for all of these students, any student who might be eligible for this modified CD, if you apply to us to get that modified CD, we want you to let the family know. We want you to let the student know that this has happened. So we advise that, in writing, and we've talked about before, through email, through a letter or other written format, because, you have other ways of reaching families in writing using the different electronic systems that you have. But getting in touch with the family, letting them know that you've applied for the modified CD, make sure that information is written very plainly and translated as necessary, and include in that message the offer to meet with the parent to talk about graduation, so that the family can then ask if they want to talk about that further, because we just want to make sure everybody's well informed about what's coming, and that there's a really good connection to adult services, that everybody's ready for the student to leave public education and go on to adult services. So that's why we think this additional notification is really important. So getting down to the end here, I promise, we did just recently put out a new advisory, and this is about students with autism and their ability to apply to DDS for adult services. So this advisory talks about the fact that what's important to know about the fact that young people with autism, particularly adults with autism actually, have the ability to avail themselves of DDS services is that the application has to come from the parent, not from the school district. And so what our advisory says is that we really encourage you to work with your families to make sure that they know that they need to apply when the student is 17.5 years old. So we want to make sure that our families are informed. This is families of all children with autism. And so kind of any student with autism, we want to make sure the family knows that they can make this application to DDS when they're 17.5. It's not the same thing as a 688 referral. 688 is for a more limited number of children with autism. This is inclusive of all children with autism. And DDS will then make that determination about adult services. And we have more information for you in this advisory. So appreciate your attention to that. And we look forward to seeing more of our young people availing themselves of adult services as they move into the adult world and they leave public education. So this is really the end, and we really will get to questions. I'm hosting a pooled testing webinar on Monday, and why I'm telling you about this in particular as special education leaders is that many of you also oversee nursing and health services from within your districts. And in this particular meeting, we're going to be joined by the Community Tracing Collaborative, the CTC, to talk about contact tracing, particularly as we welcome more students back into our schools. We want to make sure that we're really ready with a really solid understanding of contact tracing. And so Community Tracing Collaborative will be joining us. So I thought that might be useful for you to know about. April's just putting in the chat right now the link to the Zoom link for that meeting. And so please pass that on as necessary to members of your team who might need to know about that. We'll also have some very important updates on pooled testing that I can't wait to share with you as well. Our next special education leaders meeting will be on April 9th from 11:30 to 12:30. So take a note of that. And we will, of course, send you the link ahead of time along with the agenda, as we always do. And then finally, just a reminder about the De-Escalation Strategies panel discussion on April 27th. We look forward to seeing you or members of your team there. So that's it for me today. Glad, Nina, to turn it over now to you for questions and answers.
Excellent. Thank you, Russell. Most of the questions have to do with the learning plans and extended school year. The first one, though, is about dyslexia. Once the dyslexia guidance is released, what is the timeline for implementation?
Yeah, so there's no discussion of timeline. It's really the idea that you need to start working towards implementation of it. It is guidance. It's not a requirement. We do hope you'll take it seriously. We hope you'll follow the guidance. Obviously, we think it's very sound. But I think that as with a lot of things, it will require changes, and I think at the district level, kind of prioritizing what are those changes you need to do first, and what will you get to later in order to fully implement both the screening strategies and the intervention strategies. I think have to be decided locally. But it's not like it's because it's guidance. It's not like if it was a requirement, we'd have to give you kind of a timeline to say, here's when you have to implement it by, because it's a requirement. No, this is guidance. And so you have to decide at the local level, like, what are our strategies? What's our priority to implement this guidance if we're taking it on?
Great, thank you. Can you just clarify again? There are a lot of questions about the special ed learning plans. So this one says the special ed learning plan will be different than written and still different from the IEP. Does the learning plan need to be revised this spring? So I think if you just clarify and kind of go over the learning plans again, that would be awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we want to make sure that it's clear to all parties, to teachers, to administrators, to parents about how special education services are being delivered, if they're being delivered differently. So let's just imagine that you have a learning plan that's written predominantly for a remote model or a hybrid model, and having students come in person, if there's still going to be, quite a few changes to how the special ed services will be delivered, you might need to update the learning plan. We're not going to introduce a new document to you. The learning plan has always been the place to go to. And when you go back, and if you go into the Wayback Machine and look at how it's written from last summer, we have different, you can modify it for like how it can look for in-person, or how it can look for remote, or how it can look for hybrid. So you might need to build out a section of it that you hadn't had to build out before if you were, for example, in a remote model. But hopefully, as much as possible, as students return to in-person learning, you're able to provide this services, very close to how they're written on the IEP. So I think, on some level, you're going to have to decide, have you crossed that line into services being provided differently, and you need to update the learning plan, or, everything's a little bit different. And maybe we don't need to change the learning plan because we're really still kind of, we're delivering the services as they're written, maybe just with very slight changes. I wouldn't say you have to rush out and change the learning plan to reflect that.
Great, thank you. And can you give an example of what you mean about a contingency?
Yep, absolutely. So as I mentioned before, let's just imagine you're coming to an IEP meeting. And I know that I had students in my district when I was a special education director who we knew were very immunocompromised. And on a good day, we had to be really careful about what that student was exposed to in our schools. And so with COVID, we're imagining, that we'll be ready for in-person learning for the fall. We're looking forward to it. But for a student like that, families might say, I'm not sure my child is going to be able to go back into the school next fall. Other children, great. But my child, who is already very immunocompromised, I don't know. And so what we're saying is, write the IEP, write the service delivery grid to maintain that stay put, to maintain that student's right to special education services that that student needs. Put those services into the grid as if the student was coming in person. But in the additional information section, or in the N1, that's where you would write about how special education services would be provided differently next year for a student like that. So you're not writing a learning plan for that child, but you're putting maybe some of those same ideas about, that you had from this year into the additional information section or the N1 for that type of student. That's one example that we have kind of front of mind right now, because we know those kids are out there, and we know you need answers on how to work with those families right now.
Great. Is it a team determination or parental determination whether the student returns to school or remains remote?
Are we talking about the remainder of the school year, summer, or next year?
School year.
This school year. Yeah. So we asked you already to survey your families and have to get student level information about whether or not they want to come back in now that we're offering full in-person learning. So particularly for our elementary students, our middle school students, our high school students, even that you're asking families as we make this shift, do you want to, are you coming in, or are you going to stay remote? We actually asked you to ask all of your families this though. So even a student, if you're in a hybrid model, we're imagining that some families, when they find out that all students are coming in, they might say, no, I kind of want to go to remote. So all families should be surveyed to ask which direction do they want to go. Do they want to come in person for the remainder of this school year, or do they want to stay remote or remote? And they're given that opportunity. That information we think is really crucial to your planning, particularly around the capacity and the space requirements that you'll need to meet in order to welcome all students who want to come in person, whose parents sign them up to come in person, that you're ready for them come, the date in April by which you'll be bringing them back. You're on mute.
Okay, give me 1 second here. This is about extended school year. So similar, but a little bit different. If a student is in person in the spring, does the family still have the option to have remote ESY for their child in the summer?
Yeah.
And then,
yeah.
yep.
No,
Go ahead. And then the other question related to that is, can we only offer remote extended school year services for families who are remote this school year?
Yeah, so we're, you know, you're always in touch with family about ESY anyway. You have, for scheduling purposes, you just have to be in touch with your families a little later in the spring. And so we're asking kind of in a kind of no questions asked type of way. Like, we're not saying you were in person, so you can't switch to remote during the summer. We're saying we're giving families this option. You know, there definitely can be kind of counseling and support for families. We believe that as many students, particularly students with more complex and significant disabilities, really need to be in person. And so there's nothing wrong with making sure that families are very well informed about the decision they're making. But we're not saying that you can sort of tell families that they can't make the decision. If they make the decision, we're allowing them to make that decision without sort of pulling back this offer. The offer is there, but make sure it's an informed decision by the family, so that we, you know, get as many students in person as we can. But we're not going to tell a family that they can't make this decision if they so make it, regardless of what they were doing during the school year. And I have had lots of emails about this, with concern about, you know, what if a family's just traveling? And I don't, you know, we don't have an easy way around that. That might happen, and, you know, we're going to have to continue on.
Great. Do you have any suggestions about strategies for transitioning kids back to in-person learning?
Yeah, absolutely. And we wrote about them in the guidance document that we released on March. I have to remember the date. Was it the 8th or the 9th, for heaven's sake?
The 9th, yep. Yep.
The 9th, thank you, Nina. So March 9th, we wrote about some ideas there. And so particularly the idea of, you know, maybe preparing students with videos or social stories, having students meet some of the staff or come into the building ahead of time. We think it is very important for children who've really kind of, you know, gotten used to, for example, the model that they're in right now. And this will be a big change for them, particularly our younger students. And so building them up to being ready for that. Let's just imagine it's an elementary student, getting them ready for that April 5th date through a lot of the strategies that we know that work. Again, those social stories, videos of the teachers, a video tour of the school, a meet and greet, an ability to come in and see what the school will look like with that trusted adult in their life, you know, a parent, a caregiver coming into the school with them to kind of help with that kind of transition away from that caregiver into the care of the school that they will now be learning in. So we hope that those ideas from the March 9th guidance are helpful to you.
Great. And I think this will be the last question, but I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot of great questions. We have questions about transportation, staffing, additional questions about extended school year, about medical forms. So we will be discussing those in our groups. So the final question, Russell, is do you have any thoughts about students who have challenges wearing masks as they return to in-person?
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we've really had the chance going into schools virtually, and then I visited a school personally in person recently, and really had a chance to see this firsthand. So keep in mind that we have guidance on this, particularly, it's in a couple of different places. On our website, it's in the summer 2020 special education guidance about the type of PPE, the type of protocols that should be followed if students can't wear masks. We work really closely with DPH on that. DPH subsequently put out the same guidance for school health professionals. And so I would encourage you to go back and take a look at that, because it hasn't changed in terms of, for anyone who has to provide support to a student at less than 6 feet of distance, and that student can't wear a mask, we consider, again, the PPE that's necessary, the training that's necessary, the protocols that you should follow. And so I hope you find that helpful, because again, it's still relevant now, just as it was then. And I've gone into schools virtually. I've gone into a school live in person just recently, and saw how the teachers were supporting those students without masks. I also think what's pretty remarkable is that students are really showing us that they can wear masks, sometimes for limited amounts of times, and they're building it up. But I'm amazed at how many students are so easily wearing masks for much of the school day or all of the school day, and how teachers are supporting students to wear masks for longer periods of time throughout the day if it is a particular challenge for that student. But again, I'd refer you back to our guidance from last summer where we wrote extensively about what to do if you're working with a student who can't wear a mask and you have to be closer than 6 feet away. Well, thank you, everyone. As always, I appreciate your time, your attention, your questions, your dedication to our students, and we look forward to reviewing those questions that we couldn't answer today, just like Nina said, so we bring you more information the next time we meet. It's Friday. It's a beautiful day. I hope you have a really good weekend, and we look forward to seeing you the next time that we are together. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.